Rudolf Steiner was ahead of his time during his time. And he's actually ahead of his time even in this time. Now, he's been dead for almost 100 years. And we could say, well, what does it mean to be ahead of your time? It means that you see beyond the difficulties of the time that you live in to the solutions that people haven't even dreamt there was a problem for. And the challenge in that is to have contemporaries believe your vision. And without that belief, if they have no context, or the way they say in esoteric circles, if you don't have the organ of perception, if you don't actually work on yourself to perceive in the proper way, you just see the world as it is, not as it could be. So he could see the world, Rudolf Steiner could see the world as it could be, not as it was or as it is even now. He saw the world as it could be. And that makes, I feel that that's a lonely path. It's a very lonely path. And his challenge during his time, and even now for the people that are following it, is to speak what he found to people, the masses of people who have no organ of cognition. They have no cosmology to put that in a context, their life in a context, in a spiritual context, we could say. They may have a spiritual tradition, but for me, what is unique about the work of Rudolf Steiner, what's inspired my life about it, is that it's not just a tradition. He threw down the glove and said, you have to do something with this. This is not something that's a tradition that comes to you that you repeat. This tradition is to almost not have a tradition. You know, so I've heard the quote that he said, I would change the name of anthroposophy every day. Rudolf Steiner would change anthroposophy every day. He would change the approach to life every day. And to me, that's inspiring. But it's also very challenging because people like the status quo, and even, even the people who are doing that work like the status quo, but they have to challenge themselves not to be in the status quo. So I think that's, to me, that is the challenge, is to say, how does this stuff fit into your life? And for me, I was in Zen, and I was always different. I was in this child of the 60s, you're shopping around for your guru. And I finally found in Rudolf Steiner's work somebody who could address agriculture, food, education, the arts, medicine, astronomy, a whole nexus of contemporary problems with a consistent cosmology. And that's why I've stayed in it all these years, is to say this man is an inspiration for the future. And that's a challenge to the status quo.
So Dennis, what challenge have you set yourself?
Yeah, what challenge? There are actually, to my understanding, there are actually two to do this work. And the one is the outer challenge, and that is to actually deal with the science of the day, to try to make an insight into the science of the day so that you understand the fundamental principles that science is working from. And there's a lot of abstraction in those principles. And so you have to kind of eat the abstraction, even though it's not quite so palatable. There's a kind of death force in the analytical way in which science is done. And I think that's the one side, is to actually try to find in the science of the day what are the actual fundamental forces, or we could even say beings, that are present as force patterns in science, whether it's weather or chemistry or plant growth or whatever. There are certain fundamental movements and patterns that need to be understood in a clear, logical way. That's one challenge. That's, we could say, the outer challenge. And then there's the inner challenge of, we could say, the temptation of knowledge, the temptation to power of knowledge, of inflation. And the inflation is that you think you know more than you actually do. And this is a path of knowledge, and the more you learn, the more you think you know. And so the inner challenge is letting go of what you know systematically, so that you can get to a state of inner silence about your favorite ideas. And if you can get to a state of inner silence about your favorite ideas, there's a death force in that for your favorite idea. Once you face that in yourself, that enables you to go to the outer side and see the patterns more clearly without the bias of your favorite idea. So there's a kind of breathing back and forth between the world and the soul. And the goal is to marry the world and the soul. That's called the alchemical wedding. So in Rudolf Steiner's work, there's a core of alchemical wisdom of the problem, the challenge of doing research that involves the world as it is in a rational way, and my soul as it is in a very irrational way, in we could say an imaginative way that is unique to me and my feelings as a person, as a unique person. That has to meet the abstraction of codified science head on, and somehow you have to find a blending. So there's a breathing back and forth of the meditative life and the study, and then in the old days they say, pray, study, 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 work, pray. So that's like a mantra. You pray to clear your soul, you study, you study, you study, then you do the work, then you pray again, hoping that you're not inflated with what you think you know, and that you can do we call it a giveaway with that in order to see the world new, to see it fresh. So that, I think it's the challenge, and Rudolf Steiner did that his whole life and gave to us the techniques and materials from the tradition to do that. And I think that's where he's asking us, can you do this in the way I did it? You'll find different things, you'll be involved in a different way, but can you do the work the way I did it, not what I did?
There is an attitude that our subjective feelings, if you like, get in the way of knowledge.
And they do in the outer knowledge. So in outer knowledge, I have to get my subjective feelings out of the way. And that's absolutely true, and that's today's science. But on the inner planes, the only thing I have is my feelings that are true to me. And that's where I have to check them with the same rigor that I check some experiment on the outside. I have to check my feelings on the inside with the same type of rigor, but not analytically. I have to do it imaginatively. I have to do it aesthetically. So on the inner planes, my barometer for truth is aesthetic perception and the rightness of things. And on the outside, then I have facts and the burden of proof on the outside. The link between the two is the way I form an inner picture. Then we get to Goethe. And Goethe's, the importance of Goethe's work in the forming of inner pictures and imaginations that allow me to breathe between my inner life and the outer life of nature to find some type of bridge. The difficulty with Goethe is that because of the way he worked and the time that he worked, he had to kind of exclude his inner life, and in his own life he separated his poetry from his science. That's made it difficult for his true genius to be accepted today because it was separated. He did it. And so the way I usually say it, Goethe could never get to anthroposophy. And we need to. So we need to take what we learn from Goethean observation of the world and apply it to our own soul life. And then that organ of perception is built that allows us to breathe between the two.
Yes,
So there's the lore about Rudolf Steiner and Goethe. If you Steiner edited Goethe's morphological works in Weimar when he was a very young man, and if you read those documents that he wrote that Steiner wrote at that time, there's this sense in them that he used Goethe as a kind of ladder to come down into the world. That there was something in the vision of Goethe, of the organic nature of the vision, that allowed Steiner's cosmology in him to come down and meet plants and minerals and things like that. And out of that kind of incarnation process, then Rudolf Steiner took that grounding and said, here's a method that this genius Goethe found out of German idealistic thought, and now we can build out of the world a whole picture of how the cosmology of the cosmos meets the cosmology of the world, and that became anthroposophy. And so the lore is that while Steiner could use Goethe as a bridge to come down, Goethe, out of his need of the time that he did his science in, he needed to refute science, analytical science coming out of Newton. And that refutation meant that he had to have it kind of nuts and bolts, cause and effect as much as he could. His genius was that he could do that in an organic way, in an organic vision. However, it would be difficult for Goethe to go from that organic vision up into a cosmology. He distrusted cosmology. Goethe distrusted kind of spiritual cosmology of angels and things like that. So it'd be very difficult for Goethe to go into anthroposophy. I imagine he would probably make a terrible anthroposophist, Goethe, if he was alive.
What did you mean by the fact that Steiner didn't find it easy to relate to the physical world?
The story I heard was when he was studying mineralogy, he had a very difficult time remembering the names of the different rocks. It was very abstract to him. This rock is this and this rock is that, the naming of things. And the categorizing today, if you go to university and study science, you get a list of terms, you get a list of names. And those names are abstractions. They are like dust that's fallen out of the livingness that he was perceiving in geology or perceiving in living things. Steiner was perceiving the spiritual world in life. And so when he would have to memorize a list of names, it just seemed inessential.
How on earth did he survive as a student?
Because it was difficult. So then if you read the stories of him having these clairvoyant experiences, he had to keep them to himself.
But he passed his exams, didn't he? His scientific exams.
He passed his exams because out of just the sheer will of being an initiate. But his task wasn't to pass his exams. His task was to bring anthroposophy. So he did it. He had a keen interest in geometry and in mechanical things, but out of will. It wasn't a natural thing. So when he found Goethe, later he said, "Oh, this is the key to a new science," and it is a key to a new science. It's a morphological science. It's a key to that science, but it's not a key to my soul until I do it in a Goethean way and then look at my soul. So when I look at my soul, by what I learned by looking at nature, I see not what has become, but I see the becoming of my soul. I see my soul tendencies, I see my biases, I see my fears, I see my anxieties as they arise in the moment. And the whole issue with soul work is to perceive in your soul something that's unfolding as it unfolds rather than after it has unfolded. That's the whole issue. And if I train myself to see the sequencing of growth in a plant, I develop an organ of cognition of the plant. I now need to take that organ of cognition of the plant and turn it on my own soul process. And then I see my biases.
It's almost as though you're saying all knowledge is really self-knowledge.
All knowledge that, I would say knowledge is what falls out of knowing. And once it falls out of knowing and becomes knowledge, it prevents me from self-knowing. So Goethe has a famous quote, and that is, all formulas, all inherited formulas frequently repeated lead to conviction, utterly dulling the organs of perception. So everything I inherit as knowledge is diminishing my capacity for self-knowledge. And this is a huge esoteric principle. So everything that I inherit as a formula and repeat it leads to a conviction that that's what that formula is, including Goethean morphology and Buddhism or whatever. And that prevents me from actually developing an organ of perception to see my relationship to that. It's really big. It's a big issue in the world. And I think that's the challenge Rudolf Steiner brought, is how you're going to redeem abstract science. You have to redeem it with self-knowledge. In the past, if I was making a medicine, my moral quality would be considered part of that medicine. And today we just have a machine do it. We have a new slavery, it's called machinery. We give them the work to do. We give the machines the work to do. We give them the will. And there will be, like the old slavery, there will be problems, social problems. There are social problems. The price of gasoline is a social problem of the new slavery. Yeah, so that esoteric side of things, the way that the esoteric side works is that there is a deep connection between me as a being that's aware of myself and the way in which the natural world has come out of the spiritual world and the will of the spiritual world. There's a deep connection, but it doesn't happen automatically. I have to actually do it, or it isn't done, because the spiritual world is already created by very creative beings, and their work is finished and ongoing, but can't be redeemed without humans. And I think that's where Goethe was pointing towards that. But if we just use the formulas that we've inherited from Goethe, they will lead to a conviction and utterly dull our organs of perception. And I would include even out of anthroposophy, if we just inherit the formulas without actually doing it, then it's not living anthroposophy.
This is a work in progress here. This is our modest attempt at our little alchemical laboratory to support our work with the biodynamic preparations that we've been exploring and developing.
What does alchemical mean then in your terms?
I would say it's a breathing.
Yeah.
It's a breathing. So the world is finished as it is, and it's in process, and I am a becoming, and behind the world that's finished is a world that's very active and becoming. That's the planetary realm. And when I pay attention to not only what I'm doing on a given day, but where the planetary activity is on that day, my heart, the rhythm, that is an expert in rhythm, breathes. And if I pay attention to that, and I pay attention to subtle cues in the natural world, I can see there are certain doorways, there are times when you can do something that you cannot do on any other day. And we see it all the time in work that we do. You'll be working on trying to get something happen. I just was working on trying to get an oil to come out of this compound, this acid, and over at my place. And I was working on a day when the moon was in Earth. And everything was going wrong. Everything was gunky and tar and ugly stuff coming out of the retort. And then I went to bed, and then the next morning woke up, I was a little frustrated and started working, and suddenly oil was pouring out of this compound, beautiful oil. And I went and looked, and the moon had moved to water. So, and everything was fluid. Everything was flowing and moving on. And there's a breathing in that.
Do we need to be more conscious of these things,
Oh,
then, all of us?
absolutely.
In our, I mean, not just as alchemists, but in life, then. But how
That's it.
how do we
Yeah.
how do we do that then?
By having a practice where you do something, and then instead of just doing it and going home and eating a Burger King, you actually take what you did that day into sleep as an imaginative picture. And then in the morning you listen with your heart, and then pictures come. And then during that day you work with those pictures. You come in here and you burn something, or you Matthias will call me up and say, oh, a cow went down today, we'll go and do that. We go and gather that thing, but behind it, we're both saying, well, where is the moon today, and how's the sun acting? And we try to always have that as the background. So because when we make a substance, we want as many of those rhythms to be, the breathing rhythms, to be in line as possible. Right from the the very beginning. Keep it in that cycle, and when you get done, that substance is totally permeated with activity, because you have a consciousness of the rhythm of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I would say that's what we're trying to actually do here, is say, it's one thing to burn something, and it's another thing to burn something and then return to it again when there's a certain configuration, and then return that again when you use it. So we give out protocols for the stuff we make, having to do with the moon spray, and our clients are starting to give us feedback on how the sprays are working, because most of them are grape growers and they monitor very closely very minute changes in the composition of the juice daily. Mm-hmm. So we get computer readouts that tell us how the moon is affecting what we do, and then we modify our burning protocols and planting protocols based on what they give us in the ripening process. So what we're working towards is a kind of consortium with those growers, where we all understand it's very important. Substance is one thing, but substance is movement that's come to rest. We want to get the movement, and the archetype of the movement is the planetary realm. So you see equipment here, but the equipment is the corpse. The actual work is the consciousness that we speak to each other all the time. Well, what's happening today? What's happening today? When did we do this last? Keeping logs of when we did something. So we have whole protocols where we're waiting to go, today we do this.
But you need the equipment, don't you? You need the corpse.
And you need to understand the background of the equipment. You need to understand the actual grounding. So here's a kiln. One of the experiments we're working with, we take tartar from a grape growing, It's just stuff that's maybe get a little tartar.
Yeah, I'll get some from there.
Yeah.
It's sparkly.
And it's kind of a waste product in grape growing and wine making. And we have a little kind of a crude vessel here that we burn it at a certain temperature, and that very acrid smoke comes out. And then we take that and put that in an organ of a cow and a particular process that we use. Here's the tartar. It's just this, it's like a rock, and it falls out of the wine as a waste product. And when you burn it, it smells horrible. It smells terrible. It smells like burnt paper and refuse. It smells like a burning dump. But in this is this remarkably beautiful oil. And
Beautiful in what sense?
and an acid, a very active acid that's only found in grapes. It's in the whole plant growth. It's only found in grapes. It's called bitartaric acid. And we have a process that we go through to render that out. And then we put that in a preparation, and we give that to the clients, and then we tell them the moon rhythm to spray in. And we've seen incredible results from it. Very regulated growth, no, the wine that's made out of it is very harmonious and beautiful. We hear things like, well, we've never seen wine like that from that area and stuff, you know.
I'd have to say that's due to the organizing and regulating that processes that we made the preparation, those rhythmical motifs you were describing earlier, and then how we apply that and replicate that through the season sends sort of a message to the phenotype in the plant that uses that as a background or a musicality as a model. Yeah. It's kind of a musicality. It's sort of that the plant listens to and formally begins to express, in a sense, what that rhythmical sequence we've been working on. So it's a.
So you take the end product and give it back to the next generation, but you purify it. It's called spagyrics. So in alchemy, there's a principle called spagyrics. It means you take apart the original substance and you purify each part and then bring it back together again in a rhythm. That's called spagyrics. It comes from Paracelsus. So we're doing spagyrics. And Rudolf Steiner, in his own preparations, was doing spagyrics.
I know you're working from indications given by Rudolf Steiner. To what extent was he tapping into something that we knew in the past and have forgotten, or is it new?
The answer is yes.
Yes, what? It's new?
Yes, both.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you know, Rudolf Steiner didn't appear just out of the blue. There's an old saying, genius never escapes its age. So he was a genius. And he brought the best elements from the ancient traditions together and synthesized them in a scientific context. That's why his work is called spiritual science. He felt it was really important that the scientific context be recognized by spiritually minded people. Because he grew up at a time in his development when spiritism and Ouija boards and table tapping and seances, that was the way people got access to spirit. And he inherited the mantle of theosophy, and that was part of their lore. And what he said was, no, it has to be made in the same way that we make science. However, on the other side of science is this death rationale force that can't imagine life forces and beings as spiritual beings. That's a whole other dimension, and they're separated now. And so it's necessary to bring those two together. in order for science to be redeemed, and in order for spiritual work to move into the future rather than just be stuck on what we inherited from the past. It has to move into the future, but the scientific revolution is not random. It's not an anomaly. It's a reality. So it's not going to go away. So the scientific worldview is not going to go away. So we can't just go out and hug trees and talk about fairies and hope that that's going to go somewhere. Even if that's the perception that we have, that has to be grounded in reason. So it's both. It's an inheritance from the past. And if you read Paracelsus and Basil Valentine and the Alchemists, you'll see everywhere in their work is this threads that Rudolf Steiner was picking on and pulling forward. And yet, with his cosmology and his rational training in science, he could move it further. And when he did, he pulled the cart along of the spiritual work into a rational, it can be rational. You know, Vedanta and things like that were going in that direction, but they came from an Eastern tradition. And so for me, personally, as a Western person, I found in Rudolf Steiner's work as a teacher that I can make a connection to my spiritual work and to science in the world through his teachings. And that really appealed to me. It was, you know, it's not just go off and go on the mountaintop and save yourself and, you know, or it's not just empirical, rational, let's be practical. There's somewhere in the middle is the blending, and for whatever reason, I'm attracted to that. And now I found another guy I can work with where we can, you know, I'm very sanguine and he's very phlegmatic. And it's a good match. So technically, he's a very good technician with his hands and a networker in terms of materials. And I have a tendency to be in my thinking and imaginative realm, but we speak very well with each other and we work well. So I think it's a good thing we're doing. And he's very interested in alchemy, and it's rare for me to be able to say things. I found 3 or 4 people in my life that I can just speak the alchemical language, and they go, oh, okay. Yeah, it's a rare thing.
Do you think it was a problem, or perhaps it was inevitable, that in Steiner's lifetime there was nobody of sufficient caliber who would stand up to him or say, you know, hang on a moment, what do you mean? I mean,
there were people who tried to do it, but they always did it on the basis of abstraction and empiricism. And his whole argument is that we have to have an empiricism of our own soul. We have to empirically look at our own soul activity and our own perceptions, our own sense activity, and the way we form ideas around sense activity in order to redeem the religion and science and the arts. That's really what we're being asked to do, I think, by Rudolf Steiner. And it's way in the future. We think that our science is the best ever, but we have no idea how they built the pyramids. We haven't a clue how they built Machu Picchu. We haven't a clue how they got the gold to blend into the glass in the Chartres Cathedral to make the beautiful reds. That's lost to us. And it's because we're too coarse in the way we think about things. We're not fine enough. And we don't take the things we find in the world into sleep and then pull them back in the morning as imaginations and get a breathing across the threshold. And that's the work we do. That's the work we try to do with our clients, is say, you know, take these pictures that we're working with and the rhythms and stuff, take them into sleep and we can start a dialogue about it. So that's...
What happens in sleep then? What are you saying?
Alchemists say when you go to sleep, the thing that you end your day with is a kind of extract, a kind of tincture of your day, especially if you think your day backwards. So that's a process we call boiling. Rudolf Steiner called it Rückschau. It's the daily review of thinking your work backwards. So if we're working with a problem here, how to deal with tartar, I form in me a picture of what I think the process is, forwards and then backwards and backwards several times right before I go to sleep. And then when I wake up in the morning, I clear my mind and get silent and listen. And then when I go out into the laboratory, there's what an alchemist would call dew. The dew falls. What Paracelsus said was during the evening, your soul mingles with the souls of the planets. And in nature, the dew is actually a sacred substance. It falls onto plants as an image of the movement, and we collect it.
That's dew.
That's dew and rainwater. That's what all these vessels are filled with, rainwater and dew. And then we use that to make our spagyrics, because they're hidden in that is the dew of the cosmos. That's the wisdom of the new day. And it's in that as a substance, and it's in us as the potential to understand symbolic imagery. That's a dew that comes from the experiment I do in the evening. So when I do the experiment in the evening, it's just like putting something in here and putting the heat on it. It goes up and a steam forms and comes and it gathers there. So this still is a metaphor of my meditative life in nature. It's the process of this, of creating. I'll put tartar in there. I put the dew. I'll put rainwater in there. I heat it, and a steam comes up that's invisible, and then condenses, and I gather it here as a dew. That contains in it only the finest parts, and the dregs are left there. That's what I leave in my daily life when I think backwards. I'm putting a heat under the dregs of my daily life. I cook it, it goes into the spirit, and then comes back in the morning as a dream. That's what's in there. It's the dream of what that is.
And I suppose on a larger scale, that's what happens when we die then.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this meditation is on the death of nature. Nature has died so we could be free. And we owe it a debt. We owe it, we need to redeem the death that is what we call nature, the corpse of nature. We need to redeem that because that is sacrificed so we could be free.
I'd venture to say that schooling is in the indications he gave in the agriculture course, the biodynamics, the preparations is an analog or a metaphor of this process that he just described. The grinding of the crystals into a fine surface, the rhythms that we put it in, releasing them is giving to nature a feeling of that freedom.
Of
freedom.
Yeah.
You're releasing it.
Yeah.
So the technique is to find an organ that's a picture of the substance you're releasing, and then work with that rhythmically during the year in order that it becomes enhanced.
Yeah.
So that's total alchemical thinking. Yeah.
Can I just ask you a little bit more about sleep? Because are you implying then that in sleep we are, as it were, informed, enlightened in a different kind of way then?
We can be, if we choose to do the work. Or we just go to sleep.
And what is the work then?
Is going backwards through my day and then taking something from nature that I build a personal relationship to. Rudolf Steiner says in the agriculture course to the farmers, you have to build a personal relationship to the manure. What does that mean? So if I observe a certain process going on in my manure pile, a mushroom forming and then a steam forming and then it stops for a certain way, and I just observe it and move along, I'm missing a chance for communication with the beings who are animating that, the consciousnesses of the forces. If I take that picture of that thing and I run it backwards and forwards, I'm reinvesting it with a new kind of will, but then I let it go backwards into sleep, and that forms a question into the elemental beings saying, I think it's like this, what do you think? And then in the morning, the dream, when I come back in from that place, I'm not just randomly nothing. I've actually had a little death process. Sleep is the little brother of death. And from that, I can gather, do, based on what I have put in the night before. And then I collect it. And then I do it again, and I collect it. And then I do it again, and I collect it, and I do it.
In a sense, then, we're sort of reincarnating every morning, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Rather than just lifetime to lifetime.
Yeah. We die each night a little bit, and we incarnate again, new, each morning, or else we'd be totally dead tired in the morning all the time. We have a new incarnation, a new chance.
And our karma, in that sense, today, my karma today is what I did yesterday.
The short karma. I mean, I have race karma. I have, the karma of being in California is pretty big, right? But my own personal, there's an element of this. I'm making like a ferment out of my life. I'm making compost out of it, rather than just having it spread out all over the loafing yard. I'm gathering it and putting it in a vessel, a hermetic vessel. And then I put will under it, and then only the finer part comes over, and then I take that and I make a medicine out of it for myself, or the earth.
Yeah.
This is the way we talk to each other.
Because what you call your preps, your preparations, are in a sense medicines, aren't they?
Absolutely.
It's not just fertilizers.
They're medicines for the earth.
Yeah. But why does the earth need medicines? I mean, if we left it alone, wouldn't it be perfectly all right?
No. If we left it alone, it would be very lonely, because it's our mother, and she says to us all the time, you haven't called home in a while. You're only using my bank account to live. So you need to love me and nurture me and feed me with medicines, because I'm sick from your neglect.